We better maintain that one and collect the assignments through that. I will do that immediately. Anyway, don't think that I purposely do that because of the whatever the work during the daytime. Anyway, things are dragging. Much work with the semester one coordination, and headship actually relatively less now, as you guys are not here. Because of that, I could manage that LMS thing, and actually LMS was here maybe 2-3 weeks back now. For this module, was it there? For entrepreneurship module, was it there? It was there. Not sure about even this one. I will check and update you. Anyway, I have already shared the lecture slides by now, but I want to collect a couple of assignments from you guys. For that, definitely we will use the LMS because the record is there. Always. Okay, I think we finish at this point. That means it is all about end-to-end VLAN connectivity, right? It is talking about the 80% of the traffic continue within the VLAN. So if we just consider whatever the VLAN, so the traffic generated by the computers are tried to communicate the other devices in the VLAN. 80% of such communications are there. අපි network එක ඇතුලේ තමයි 80% of traffic යන්නේ. Network එකෙන් එළියට යන්නේ 20% of the traffic. So actually, if we properly arrange the VLAN, for example, if we just allocate the academics into one VLAN and administration into one VLAN, maybe top management into another VLAN, then that will be fine. But if we maintain the academics in the different faculties into the different VLAN, then finally what will be happen? Academics from Faculty of ICT will communicate with the academics in the Faculty of Engineering Technology, ET. Such communication can be common traffics because academics are always communicating. So it is better to analyze the situation, and depending on the situation, we introduce the VLANs. So having one VLAN for all the academics, there is no harm. No need to have the VLANs for different faculties. Because faculties are just doing the similar things, nothing to hide. But academics and students should be isolated in two different VLAN because not allowing them to communicate with the academic students to communicate with the academic VLAN. Right? Dividing the academic into multiple segment to introduce the VLANs, it is not mindful because inter-VLAN communication will be increased. As a result, then this 80-20 rule will not be appear. Right? And moving forward, end-to-end VLANs allow devices to be grouped based upon resource usage. End-to-end VLANs allow devices to be grouped based on upon the resource usage. That's what I already discussed. Based on the resource usage. දැන් අපි academics ලා කියලා ගත්තේ academics ලා එකට වැඩ කරන්නේ. එයාලට තමයි මොන හරි document share කරන්න තියෙන්නේ. Academic admin කට්ටිය දෙක එකට දාන්න නැත්තේ admin ලගේ documents academics ලාට බලන්න අවශ්‍ය නැති දේවල් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. academics ලාගේ ඒවා admin ලාට බලන්න නැති අවස්ථාවල ඉන්නවා. එතකොට ඒක boundary එකකින් වෙන් කරන්න පුළුවන් දෙයක්. Anyway, if they want to communicate with each other, that means one academic staff want to communicate with the administration staff, then possibly inter-VLAN communication can be arranged with the help of the layer 3 device. So that traffic is 20% that we discussed, but whatever the other traffic belongs to 80%. So once we just focus a lot, analyze a lot about the traffic behavior of the traffic, we should be able to isolate different local area networks in better way. right? This includes such parameters as server usage, project teams, and departments. For example, server usage. That means if academics are using the file server or shared file server, usually in our uni that is not there, but if shared location is provided for lecturers and students, right? I think you know how to provide that by now, because you learn about the domain control and things like that with some other module, Windows 7 administration, something like that. So once we introduce the domain controller and allow students and lecturers to use the network part of the hard disk, server hard disk as partition, that means shared location in the server, right? Then we usually access that file server. So what do you think? If we just introduce the Vlan student, Vlan academic, Vlan administration, and introduce the server separately, maybe Vlan server, will that mindful? Will that mindful? Vlan student, Vlan staff, or Vlan academic, right? Vlan student, Vlan academic, Vlan administration, Vlan servers. Servers ඔක්කොම ගිහලා එකම Vlan එකකට දානවා. What do you think?
It is some difficulties.
Yes.
It is some difficulties for using.
Yeah, traffic. Actually, such implementation can be there because some cases this traffic consideration might not be the priority consideration. 80-20 rule might not be the priority consideration. Sometimes might be the consideration is the isolating the servers in this very secure manner in the separate network. In such cases, it is perfectly fine to introduce the separate server VLAN. That means whatever the servers in the server room will be there in that VLAN, right? So all the other users, or the users in the other VLAN, access the servers in the way that inter-VLAN communication, traffic moving outside the present VLAN. As academic, I'm in the VLAN academic. That my traffic, when we access the server, my traffic will move away from the Vlan academic and get into the Vlan server and access the server, right? If it is required to do so. But the mindful way, right? If there is enough resources, if we can maintain three servers, then we can allocate that different file servers, one into students, one for academics, one for administration. If we want to introduce server partition for everyone, we can do so and add that server into the particular VLAN. So server academics when කරපු server academic na ඒක add කරනවා VLAN academic වලට. Then they can communicate each other. So traffic will not moving away from the VLAN. Traffic will not be moving away from the VLAN. Okay. So depending on the situation, actually, we should address the situation. Overall understand about the different concept will be considered in such situation. Right? මට කියන්න ඕනේ server එකක් එහෙම වෙනම VLAN එකකට ගහන වෙලාවල් තියෙනවා. server room එකේ තියෙන devices ටික වෙනම VLAN එකකට තියලා ඒව access කරනවා නම් inter VLAN introduce කරන situation තියෙනවා by considering improved security, things like that. However, to focusing the traffic patterns, 80% of the traffic within the VLAN and 20% of the traffic going outside the VLAN, in such situation, we better introduce file servers within the VLAN. So then the traffic will not moving away from the VLAN, right? So project team, department. So those are the way that isolate the group of the users, isolate the group of the users. And then we introduce the whatever the requirement for those users within the VLAN to avoid the unnecessary traffic outside the network VLAN, outside the VLAN. The goal of end-to-end VLANs is to maintain 80% of the traffic on the local VLAN. Goal of end-to-end VLAN is to maintain 80% of the traffic on the local VLAN. So that is what we talk now. So this is focusing only about the traffic, not the other factors like security or maintainability or whatever the other infrastructure facility. Because if we just I would say want to secure the servers, we may use the firewalls. Then if we just introduce servers into different VLANs, so we have to maintain that firewalls also multiple VLANs, something complex situation will be introduced. So here only the focus is traffic within the VLAN can be maintained when the servers or project teams or departments are identified properly and include those into the one VLAN. Right? So geographic VLANs and many corporate networks have moved to centralize their resources. End-to-end VLANs have become more difficult to maintain, as many corporate networks have moved to centralize their resources. End-to-end VLAN have become more difficult to maintain. That's what I want to mention. Centralize the resources mean placing the file server at the server room, allowing everyone in the other VLANs to access that file server. Centralizing resources, right? ෆයිල් සර්වර් එක එක තැනක තියෙන්නේ. ඒක තියෙන්නේ VLAN එක වෙනම එකක්. අනිත් VLAN වල ඉන්න කට්ටිය ඒ VLAN එකෙන් ෆයිල් තියෙන shared file ටික access කරනවා. That is the centralized way of introducing the resources. So with that one, the maintainability is very difficult, right? So due to some reason, due to more access from one VLAN, server might be crashed, but it is also influence for the other VLAN as example, right? Single point of failure, because if there is a 3 different file servers for the 3 different VLANs, then if due to some reason if one went off, the other 2 is still serving, right? It is very highly unlikely all the 3 servers went off at one single time. Right? Users are required to use many different resources, many of which are no longer in their VLAN. Users are required to use many different resources, many of which are no longer in their VLAN. So inter-VLAN communication we need to facilitate. That is the consideration. That means if you are in the student VLAN, whatever the resources you want to access are not in the student VLAN. If I am in the academic VLAN, whatever the resources I wanted to access, that is not in our VLAN. For example, there is a printer. I am in the VLAN academic, printer is in the VLAN resources, right? VLAN, my server, file server is in the VLAN servers, right? There can be situation like that. It all depends on the network design. So you have to careful design. If you have enough printers, you can connect into the particular VLAN rather than sharing or sharing it with the many other VLANs in the isolated network or separate network, right? Printer is not much expensive, not much maintainability, but it reduces the traffic away from the VLAN. It reduces the traffic away from the VLAN. Keep it in mind, once we introduce the whatever the resources within the VLAN, like a printer within the VLAN, it reduces the traffic outside the network, right? It is a network improvement because whatever this stuff we can handle within the network. ගෙදර ප්‍රශ්නේ ගෙදර ඇතුළේම විසඳ ගන්නවා එළියට ගෙනියන්න ඕනේ නැහැ. හැබැයි එළියට ගෙනියන්න යන වෙලාවට මොකද වෙන්නේ? outbound traffic කියන එක වැඩි වුණාම ඒ කියන්නේ 20% කියන්නේ ප්‍රශ්නේ එළියට අරගෙන යනවා. ඒක එළියට යන ගන්න එළියට ප්‍රශ්නේ ගෙනියන වෙලාවල් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. හැබැයි ප්‍රශ්න වලින් 20% තමයි එළියට ගෙනියන්නේ. ගේ ඇතුළේ විසඳ ගන්න ඕනේ ප්‍රශ්න 80ක් 180. That is a simple understand. Right? Because of this shift in placement and usage of the resources, VLANs are now more frequently being created around geographical boundaries rather than commonality boundaries. Right? Because of this shift in placement of usage of resources, VLANs are now more frequently being created around the geographical boundaries rather than commonality boundaries. So there are two ways, right? VLAN are now more frequently being created around geographical boundaries. So the popular approach is the geographical boundaries. Commonality mean I think that based on the traffic, we try to group it to the VLAN and assume that 80% of the traffic will be handled within the network. That approach, commonality boundaries, department එක අඳුරගෙන department එකේ කට්ටිය එකට දාන, faculty එකේ කට්ටිය එකට දාන. ඒකට වැඩිය popular වෙන්නේ geographical boundaries. ඒ කියන්නේ physically එකට ඉන්න කට්ටිය එකට දානවා. Physically එකට ඉන්න කට්ටිය, that old building and new building are in the two different VLANs. Some sort of understanding is there based on the geographical boundaries, physical location එක. එක්ක new building එකේ දකුණු පැත්තේ කට්ටිය එකක වම් පැත්තේ කට්ටිය තව එකක. ඉස්සර තිබේ FTT FIVT. ඒ විදිහට තමයි faculty දෙක දෙපැත්තට බෙදලා හිටියේ building එකේ. So now it is little different with the four faculties. Anyway, that is meaningful to understand geographical boundaries to introduce the VLANs. People in that right side in the faculty of training technology, there is a Wi-Fi also named as FTT, Dean FTT. So like that, they are just grouped into the based on the geographical boundaries. Even administration in that area may attend into that VLAN irrespective of that previous consideration with academics and administration separately. So if you are just doing the academic administration, finance, such thing, that is the commonality boundaries. So geographic mean physical locations, right? So these are the advanced features and introducing the VLAN. I think some of these are repeating. Geographical location can be as large as entire building or small as small as a single switch inside writing closets. Geographical location can be as large as entire building or small as resources are there. In the old building also academic and administratives are there. So academics and administration in the old building in one VLAN, new building in another VLAN. But sometimes admin staff in the old building want to communicate with the admin staff in the new building. In such situation, inter-VLAN communication is introduced. So what do you think? Which one will be the most common? Traffic within the network or traffic moving away from the network? Now realize the situation where multiple group of people like administrators, academics, students, finance, all of the four category related computers are in the one VLAN. So maybe VLAN 10, VLAN 10. So what do you think? How the traffic will be deviated in the previous situation? The previously it is talking about the one. Now the situation is little different. Little different. That means as far as uh, same group colleges are in the different VLANs, lecturers are in the different VLAN, it is obvious lecturers want to communicate each other. As a result, the communication in between the different VLAN will be increased. Communication within different VLAN will be exceeded. So communication within the VLAN will be reduced. Right? That is the understand. So let's move forward. Although this topology means that the user must process layer 3 device in order to reach the 80% of the resources, right? That is the inter-network communication. This design allows the network to provide for a deterministic, consistent method of accessing resources. So nothing much with that. The same thing is discussing further. I would consider from here this design allows the network to provide for deterministic, consistent method of accessing the resources. So now we can understand what would be the approach to communication, whether communication within the VLAN is popular or communication out towards outside the VLAN is the popular. Such understand we can have for making decisions. 2080, 80 to 20 rows in the VLANs. දැන් මෙතන 2080 කියන්නේ මොකද්ද? Within the VLAN, outside the VLAN 20, within the VLAN 80. මෙතෙන්දි outside the VLAN 80, within the VLAN 20. එහෙම තමයි අපි cases දෙක කතා කරේ. මේ මෙතන කියන කතන්දරේ නම කියන්නේ මේ so far that was the discussion. So I think same thing is discussed here. End-to-end VLAN follows the 80-20 rule. Local VLANs follows the 20-80 rules. 80% of the traffic stay in the local work group, whereas 20% destined for remote resources. Okay, outside the VLAN. Other one is the local VLAN. Only 20% of the traffic is local, whereas 80% is destined to a remote resource across the core layer. So obviously inter-VLAN communication should be happening in such situation. So those happen through that core layer. You know where the core layer is as per that diagram with the 3 tiers. So configuring the static VLANs. Static VLANs are parts on switch that are manually assigned to the VLAN by using the VLAN management application or by working directly within the switch. Configuring static VLAN. I think you are already aware about that. Port by or range of the ports are selected for assigning those ports into the particular VLAN. So you can do that. These ports maintain their assigned VLAN configuration until they change it manually. Whatever the VLAN assignments should not be override due to any other incidents. So if someone want to change, just go and change with the authentication and through the authentication and authorization process. Right? Login එක දීලා ඒකට ගිහිල්ලා තමයි කරන්න ඕනේ. These ports maintain their assigned VLAN configuration until they are changed manually. These ports maintain their assigned VLAN. Whatever the VLAN assignment are not changing with no reason, there is a reason for that. Manual involvement should be there. This topology means that the user must cross a layer 3 device in order to reach 80% of the resources. Right, so crossing the layer 3 devices mean the inter-VLAN communication. This design also allow the network to provide for deterministic consistent method of accessing resources. This design also allow the network to provide for deterministic consistent method of accessing the resources. What it means? Deterministic, consistent. Those two terms are important. Deterministic mean හිතා ගන්න පුළුවන් කියන එක. Consistent mean එක දිගට. Right? So eventually, actually, the networking environment, it should be able to predict the situation. We should have some understand what is happening. So that understanding is not changing at different time. It is very common. So that's why it is introduced as the consistent. If there is such changes with the traffic and noticeable changes, it is necessary to do the analysis and implementation and security. This type of VLAN works well in networks where the following is true. Moves are controlled and managed. There is robust VLAN management software to configure the ports. It is not desirable to assume additional overhead required when maintaining end station, MAC address, and custom filtered tables. So those are some understandable points. Moves are controlled and managed. There is robust VLAN management software configure the topic. Robust VLAN management software is the second thing. Third thing, it is not desirable to assure the additional overhead required when maintaining end stations, MAC address, and custom filter table. So it means actually, we'll try to understand. It is not desirable to assume the additional overhead required when maintaining end station. So when maintaining the end station MAC addresses and custom filtering tables. So give some understanding anyway. The overall understanding we already um, discussed. So these are supported by that overall understand. Move forward and see. So static VLAN, that means there is another way, dynamic VLAN. With the static VLAN networking where the following is true. Move the control and manage. So once devices are controllable, we can assign the key point of contact with the help of the this I would say. So with the static VLAN, actually a dynamic VLAN, we just use the VLAN management policy server. That VLAN management policy server define the which VLAN that particular device need to be assigned. So with the static VLAN, we configure the different ports into the different VLAN depending on the purpose. If there are 24 ports, we are not going to divide it into VLAN 10, 20, 30, 40 for VLANs beforehand. We have idea that 10, 20, 30, 40 will be there, but depending on the requirement. For example, 5 computers for the VLAN 10, another 6 computers for the VLAN 20, 3 computers for the VLAN 30. even 2 computers for the VLAN 40. Such situation, we need very limited number of ports, no need to consume all the ports, uh, all the 24 ports. In such situation, we just identify the requirement and assign some ports for the required VLAN and use that. In some case, someone newly appointed for the VLAN 40 related group, then definitely we have to configure another port for VLAN 40 and assign it properly. That means privileges with related to that VLAN. So statics VLAN work fine in the following situations. Most are controlled and managed. If we can manage the movement and if we can manage the control, then we can do something. For example, for lecturers, we can do the static VLAN because we know that many of the lecturers are provided the laptop from the university. So university knows that this countable number of lecturers use those laptops. MAC addresses are there, so they can configure the ports accordingly. But when we comes to the students case, if we are allowing students to get into the VLANs, it is very difficult to manage because the device that they are bringing today will not be bringing at the next day due to some reason, right? Even number of the devices are also high. So when we incorporate academics into the university VLAN, then it is possible. It is doable. Why? Moves are controlled and managed. Movement are controlled and managed. But when it considers students, it is difficult to manage because number of devices and deviation of the devices. So multiple, even many has the multiple devices, maybe laptop and phone or tab, right? Complex situations. So in such situation, we move with the dynamic, but it means most are not controlled and managed when we consider the students into the static VLAN. So we are not considering students into the static VLAN due to the management issues. So there is a robust VLAN management software to configure the ports. So use of the application software is so common in the networking era now because command line interfaces too much technical, so web interfaces are a little bit easy to manage. So average IT person also can work with such interfaces. So no need to spend for the network expert to just to manage couple of VLANs in the organization. Organization එකේ තියෙන couple of VLANs manage කරන්න ටෙක්නිකල් පර්සන් කෙනෙක් ගන්න වෙන CLI එකක් දීලා ඔක්කොම කරන්න ගියොත් එහෙම ඇඩ්වාන්ස් විදිහට නමුත් software application එකකින් ලේසියෙන් කරන්න දුන්නාම average IT knowledge එකක් තියෙන කෙනෙකුට හරියට මේ VLAN ටික බලාගෙන ඉන්න පුළුවන්. So always we encourage to have software based VLAN configurations, then it is easy to manage. It is not desirable to assume the additional overhead required when maintaining end station, MAC address, and custom filtering tables. It is not desirable to assume the additional overhead required when maintaining the end station MAC addresses and custom filtering table. Yeah. It says it is not desirable. Desirable කියන මොකද හිතාගන්න decide කරගන්න බෑ. decide පුළුවන් කියන එක. It is not desirable කියන්නේ it is difficult to decide. Right? It is difficult to decide to assume additional overhead. There is no idea about the additional overhead required when maintaining the end station MAC address and customer filtering tables. So when actual these situations are again raised when the number of devices are there in the network is increased, like the student's case. It is not possible to have and understand about the traffic that you guys are generating into the network. So in such situation again, it is not possible to come with the conclusion. What shall we do? So just go with the dynamic VLAN instead of moving forward with the static VLAN. So in the University of Maruto, they just use the authentication system username password. Through that, they are authenticated. The students are authenticated for their right VLAN through Wi-Fi access point, right? So the others, some academics are not allowed to access those Wi-Fi access point because it is in the students' VLAN. Students' VLANs are allocated for the only for the students. Then they are given the username and password. So any computer they can bring to the university and access the university website, whatever that internal website, and enter the username and password to get into the particular VLAN, right? So there is no point of finding out the MAC address and assigning it into the VLAN beforehand. It happened as a implicit instructions throughout the authentication process. So such situation we introduce it as a dynamic VLAN. So when the complexity of the users or number of users are increased, we always encourage to move with the dynamic VLANs. Any question? I just move a little bit fast. Configuring static VLANs. Dynamic VLANs don't rely on the ports assigned to a specific VLAN, right? Dynamic VLAN කතන්දරේ වෙනස් කියලා කියන්නේ the following guidelines must follow when configuring the VLANs of the Cisco 29 series switches. Maximum number of VLAN is switch dependent. VLAN 1 is one of the factory default VLANs. VLAN 1 is one of the factory default VLANs. We know that default VLAN is the VLAN 1. VLAN 1 is the default Ethernet VLAN. Default Ethernet VLAN, right? So it is considered as a default Ethernet VLAN as well. Cisco Discovery Protocol and VLAN trunking protocol advertisements are sent on VLAN 1. Right? Cisco Discovery Protocol and VLAN trunking protocol advertisements are sent on the VLAN 1. So that means administrative traffic. Right? Administrative traffics are facilitated through the VLAN 1. Cisco Discovery Protocol, VLAN trunking protocol related traffics are moving through the VLAN 1. Catalyst 29 series IP addresses in the VLAN 1 broadcast domain by default. Right, so finally it says switch must be in VTP server mode to create, add or delete VLANs. So all the switches by default in the VTP server mode. You did the practical default mode of all the switches VTP server modes. Then only you can create, add or delete VLAN. You already understand that situation. However, when you don't want anyone to configure the VLAN on that particular switch or one particular switch, you make it VTP client mode. You make it VTP client mode, then no one can change it or no one can introduce the VLANs because VTP client is always waiting. VTP client is always waiting for what? VTP client is always waiting to have IP addresses. VLAN assignments from the VTP server. VTP client always waiting for VLAN assignments from the VTP server. What is the other one? VTP other version? Client server and you did the last one of the practical, no? VTP server, VTP client, and what is the other one?
Transmitter.
VTP is transparent. Whatever the VLAN you created in the VTP transparent switches, that VLAN information is not shared with the others. That is the difference in between those three. So let's move forward. The creation of the VLAN on a switch is very straightforward and simple task. You know that, no? Just to enter the VLAN 10 and name whatever the name you want to assign. Very simple. If using Cisco iOS command-based switch, enter VLAN configuration mode with the privilege execution level VLAN database command. The step necessary to create the VLANs are shown below. So commands are now going to explore. VLAN name may also be configured if necessary. VLAN database, VLAN number, and exit. Yeah, VLAN name is optional, right? VLAN name එක තියෙන ඇයි? For us to understand. VLAN student කිව්වහම අපිට තේරෙනවා. VLAN staff කිව්වම අපිට තේරෙනවා. දැන් VLAN students ලට VLAN 10 දාලා VLAN staff VLAN 20 කියලා දාන්න පුළුවන්. It is possible. But for the communication purpose, it is very difficult. For non-technical person, if we just say VLAN 10 is this, VLAN 20 is that, then they will not be able to understand. Even for us, after some time, when we have multiple VLANs, if they are just using the VLAN 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, that means 9 VLANs, we don't know actual purpose after some time. But if you label them VLAN staff, VLAN students, VLAN finance, VLAN administration, VLAN SSO, VLAN library, VLAN admissions, VLAN, whatever the different purposes of the university, right? Those we can remember. Then we are just asking from admin, please add this new employee to the VLAN library. Right, library number is 70, for example. Then that person go and add that newcomer to the VLAN, right VLAN, right, without having any confusion. So always it is essential to remember the either name or number. So the common practice is remembering the name. So for that you have to assign the name. Otherwise, if you don't want to assign the name, there is only 3 steps to create the VLAN. After you get into the privilege mode, VLAN database, then VLAN number, then exit. That's it. With that exit, whatever the informations are recorded in the switch. The next step is to assign the VLAN to one or more interfaces. Right, interface fast Ethernet 0/9 switch port access VLAN number. You know that you have to continue for the ports that you want to assign into the particular VLAN. Configuring static VLANs. I think you did this before. I'm not going to recall them because you already know. This is actually important. This is a default VLAN. All the ports are there in the default VLAN at the very beginning. After that, once VLAN 2 and VLAN 3 is created, right? In this case, actually VLAN, there is no name like student and staff. Again, VLAN 3 and VLAN 2 have been assigned. So is that serving the purpose? අපේ අවශ්‍යතාවය කරනවද? නෑ. ඊට වැඩිය හොඳයි නමක් නැතුව නිකන් 2 3 තියලා තිබ්බනම්. We better put the proper name. Maybe VLAN students, VLAN staff, VLAN library, VLAN DG, VLAN VC. VC sir VLAN, DG madam VLAN, right? Then that meaning is there, but if again we are going to put the numbers like VLAN 2, 3, it will not work, right? It will not work in the long run. Everyone forget about this numbering mechanism, right? Always recommend to put the name, then get one by one, always consider one by one port from the default set of ports. Ports pool එකක් තියෙනවා. port 24ක් තියෙනවා default set එකේ. ඒකෙන් එක එක ගන්න තියෙනවා. In this case, VLAN 2 archive port 4. VLAN 3 archive port 3. VLAN 2 එක ගත්ත අතරින් port 4, 3 එකක් ගත්තා අතනින් port 3 and first, then port 4 first, port 3 second. Likewise, you cater your requirement. Verifying the VLAN configuration. I think you already know these things. We will quickly go through that. Good practice is to verify VLAN configuration by using the show VLAN. That is the command. Show VLAN brief or show VLAN ID number commands. Those are also some other form of the command to get into the VLAN information, right? No need to remember by heart. We are not going to examine the specific commands, but you should have idea what is the purpose of the show VLAN command, show VLAN brief command, which are two command when we consider the VLAN configuration. The following facts apply to VLANs. Create a VLAN remain unused until it is mapped to switch port. Created VLAN remain unused until it is mapped to switch port. It is obvious, right? Things in the VLAN 1 will not be learned until it is assigned to the particular VLAN. All Ethernet ports are in the VLAN 1 by default. So we need to assign one by one to the relevant VLAN. So I think you know the commands. No need to spend time on that. Lab 2, verifying the VLAN configurations. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time. You better go through that. Yeah, that is the pin configuration. It's all right once things are connected. Saving VLAN configuration, you already do that part. It is the command copy running configuration. To start up configuration, let's go through the points here. It is often useful to keep a copy of the VLAN configuration as a text file. It is often useful to keep the copy of the VLAN configuration as a text file for backup or auditing purpose. So it is possible, right? Extract the VLAN database into the file. The switch configuration setting may be backed up in the usual way using the copy running configuration TFTP. File transfer protocol. T mean not sure, maybe telnet or something. Can anyone remember TFTP stand for? TP should be file transfer protocol. T for?
Trivial.
Oh. What's that?
Trivial file transfer protocol.
Okay. So it just used to download the running configuration file into another file, not to keep it in the database. So alternatively, hyperterminal capture text feature can be used to store the configuration settings. Right? Alternatively, the hyperterminal capture text feature can be used to store the configuration set. Anyway, hyperterminal capture text I have never used. I just use the simulation environment and work with that. So hyperterminal capture, I think is this with the web portal or software solutions? With that one, it seems we can just extract the VLAN database. This part. Anyway, there are many other ways to do that, but a copy running config and startup config is the way to save the file, and you can backup it in also many other way, TFTP and the hyperterminal one. I think this is the hyperterminal. Yeah, whatever the text, then save it. Okay, then deleting. I think you know those things. No VLAN is the command. Here no VLAN. You cannot delete the default VLAN. It is not possible to delete the default VLAN. Troubleshooting VLANs. VLANs are now commonplace in campus network. VLANs are now commonplace in campus network. VLAN gives the network engineer flexibility in designing and implementing networks. VLAN also enable broadcast containment, security, geographically disparate communities of interest. Geographical disparate mean අර finance කට්ටිය admin කට්ටියකින් වෙන් කරනවා. admin කට්ටිය lecturers ළඟින් වෙන් කරනවා. isolate කරනවා physical. Logically. Broadcast containment mean the broadcast domain එක අඩු කරනවා කියලා. Eventually security will be improved because the one physical infrastructure and multiple logical infrastructure which are not communicating each other. Right, so eventually the troubleshooting also you can manage much effective manner rather than considering all as one environment, one network. LAN එකක වගේ නෙමෙයි එක switch එක VLAN තුනකට කඩලා මේව කරොත් එහෙම ඔයාලා troubleshoot කරගන්න ලේසියි. Right, however, as with the basic of LAN switching, problem can occur when VLANs are implemented. As which basic LAN switching problem can occur when VLANs are implemented. Is it basic? I mean, they mean that I would say, I think this is a common problem. We looked into that. That means obviously having LAN 1 physically a part network and having LAN 2 is another one. Students are in the LAN 1, staff in the LAN 2. And they දෙක අතර මොකක්වත් communication එකක් වෙන්නේ නැහැ නේ කොහොමද physically වෙනමනේ ඉස්සර විදියට basic switch එකක් ගත්ත computer ටිකක් ගැහුවා basic switch එකක් ගත්ත තව computer ටිකක් ගැහුවා ඒ switch දෙක connect කරා router එකට පළවෙනි switch එකේ ඉන්නේ student අනිත් switch එකේ ඉන්නේ staff then they are physically apart no need to worry too much but when it comes to the VLAN all are in the same switch but the switch is divided into multiple switches logically. So things in the one VLAN will not be communicated with the things in the another VLAN, although they are in the same switch. We should have the incorporation with the router. But logical isolation is there ineffective way. So in such situation, when you try to introduce the VLANs in that complex environment, there can be any mistake. For example, if you assign the person in the finance division related port by mistake Actually, you want to assign a port for the person in the finance division, but by mistake, you assign it to the academic. Then that user is access to the academic stuff, not the finance stuff. Uh, that user may benefited by accessing the academic, but eventually they realize that they can't work properly because the finance related resources are not accessible through that account. That is the true meaning of the VLAN concept. But if by mistake that thing happened, that is the complexity or problematic scenario with the VLAN. So let's move with the point 2 and understand that problem that they try to explain. Now we will show some of the more common problems that can occur with the VLAN, and it will provide the several tools and techniques for troubleshooting. So having a problem is not the end of the world, right? There is many other way to uh, analyze and do the proper thing. So these are the ways. Actually, one time I put this one in the exam paper also. Problem isolation, VLAN problem isolation, physical link uh, connections. Okay, that is the first thing you have to consider. Check with the CDP, fix and cabling and duplex problem. If there is a cabling problem, then check with the CDP. CDP stand for, not sure, maybe whatever the infrastructure service provider. And if yes, physical links are okay, route and switch configurations are okay. Look into the route and switch configuration. Fix any problem with the inconsistent configuration statement. So if there is such situation, then address that. Otherwise, it is yes and continue with the trunking. Fix any trunking or ISF configuration problem. Once it is realized, no branch of the trunking. Okay. So if it is yes, then go with the VLAN configuration, right? So it helps you to understand the problems in the 4 different manner. This one, this one, this one, and this one. The other 4 are accurately running with the given options, right? VLAN troubleshooting process. It is important to develop systematic approach for troubleshooting switch related to problems. We should not blindly attend with the switch related problem. We should analyze in a systematic way. The following steps can assist in isolating a problem on a switch network. The following steps can assist in isolating a problem on the switch network. Yeah, check the physical indicators such as LED status. Start with a single configuration of the switch and work outward. Check the layer 1 link, check the layer 2 link, troubleshoot VLANs that span several switches. Right? So those are little common now for you guys. In the simulation environment, we are not actually looking into the physical indicators, but some extent that indicators, LED indicators are there. With that, it is helpful, but you will not get actual experience with the indicators. But don't worry too much. You get some understand with that, and we will continue. Once you start, I will just bring you to the lab and show the stuff. LED management equivalent, switch configuration okay, physical link connections okay, path between switches okay, VLAN configuration okay. That is the entire process. No need to be digged into detail with that one. Yes, scenarios are successive scenarios towards the proper VLAN configuration, all other steps, it is possible to revise and re-enter accordingly. We should understand the recurring faults and the isolated faults to treat accordingly. Some recurrent problems are due to growth in the demand for services by workstation ports outpacing the configuration, trunking, or capacity to access the server resources. What it says, some recurring problems are due to growth in the demand for services by workstation port outpacing the configuration, trunking, or capacity to access the server resource. Try to understand the complete meaning behind that. It says actually some recurring problem, that means regularly happening problem, are due to growth in the demand for the service. The reason for the problem is the demand for the service by workstation ports outpacing the configuration, trunking, or capacity to access the server resources. Right? The workstation are trying to access the centralized resources. Eventually, problems or issues occur. For example, use of the web technologies and traditional applications such as transfer and email is cause network and traffic growth that enterprise network must handle. So some basic stuff, email, file transfer, now Facebook's also there. So with such situation, the genuine effort of the employees are questionable. So it is possible to capture their involvement, right? So with that, actually web applications and the traditional application, with the use of web application and the traditional application, one of the traditional application here, file transfer and email is causing the network traffic growth enterprise network must handle. Making the network traffic වැඩි enterprise network handle කරන්න ඕනේ. Many campus lands facing unpredictable network traffic pattern that results from the combination of the intranet traffic, fewer centralized campus serve locations, and the increasing use of multicast application. Fewer centralized campus server locations and the increase in the use of multicast application. So the recommendation is fewer centralized campus servers. Centralized approach is not encouraged because of the significant time to take for establishing the network and the increase in the use of multicast application. Free unpredictable network traffic pattern that results from the combination of intranet within the network traffic, fewer centralized campus server locations, and the increase in the use of multicast applications. So there are three reasons. Network traffic that result from the combination of the network traffic, right? Those are the three reasons for network traffic to be unpredictably increase. Combination of intranet within, I think, internetwork communication. Fewer centralized campus server locations. No centralized campus server locations, increasing the use of multicast application. Due to the multicast application, again, it happened. 80-20 rules, which started 20% of the traffic went over the backbone, is obsolete. Internal web, that means 80-20 rule obsolete කියන එක තමයි කියන්නේ අන්තිමට. The old 80-20 rule is obsolete. මොකක්ද ඒක describe කරන්නේ, which stated 20% of the network traffic went over the backbone. Across the network කියන එක obsolete වෙනවා. Internal web browsing now enable users to locate and access the information anywhere on the corporate intranet. Yes, with that one actually, obviously internetwork communication is occurred with the internet access. We don't know what is the resource we are looking for. Eventually that thing will be extracted. So VLAN communication is eventually occurred in such situation. VLAN troubleshooting process continued. Traffic patterns are dictated by uh, traffic patterns are dictated by where the servers are located. Traffic patterns are decided. Dictate කියන්නේ dictionary dictate වචන කියනවා වගේ කියන්නේ මෙහෙම වෙන්න ඕනි කියලා හිතන්නේ traffic pattern එක මෙහෙම වෙන්න ඕනි කියලා හිතන්නේ by where the servers are located, where we place the server, whether the server is placed in the centralized place or outside, and not by the physical workgroup configuration with which they happen to be grouped. Right? Physical group configuration නෙමෙයි yeah, servers are sitting outside the workgroup networks and centralized place. If a network frequently experiences the bottleneck symptoms like excessive overflow, drop frames, transmissions, there may be too many ports riding on a single trunk, or too many requests for global resources and access to intranet servers. Right? It depends on the situation. Actually, in this case, it is talking about the outflows, traffic outflows. මෙහිනම් එළියට යන ඒවා. Drop frames, drop වෙන frames, transmissions. එහාට මෙහාට යන දේවල්. There may be too many ports riding on the single trunk. Right? Too many ports riding on the single trunk, or too many requests for global resources and access to the internet resources. So eventually the internetwork communication is much popular. So traffics try to move outside the network, right? Introducing the these sort of troubles over the VLAN. Then bottleneck symptoms may also occur because the major of the traffic is being forced to traverse the backbone. Right? Bottleneck symptoms may also occur. That bottleneck means limitation, right? bottleneck බෝතලයක බෙල්ල වගේ කියන්නේ වතුර ලොකුවට තිබ්බට වැඩක් නැහැ. අර මෝඩියේ තරමට තමයි බොටල් එක අර කට තියෙන තරමට තමයි වැඩේ වෙන්නේ. bottleneck, that means it just try to introduce the limitations, right? Bottleneck. Symptoms may also occur because the majority of the traffic is being forced to traverse the backbone. ඔක්කොම නිකන් අර ඉන්ටර්නෙට්වර්ක් කමියුනිකේෂන් එකක් හින්දා backbone network එක through යන්න try කරන එක තමයි දැන් වෙලා තියෙන්නේ. Another cause may be any to any access is common. Any to any access. කියන්නේ ඕන එකක් ඕන එකට connect වෙන්න පුළුවන් කියන ප්‍රවණතාවය දැන් වැඩි. එහෙම එක වෙන්නේ මොකද්ද? අන්තිමට internetwork communication එක වැඩි වෙනවා. Within the network නෙමෙයි, outside the network. If I try to communicate, I am not communicating the computers within our VLAN. I try to access the Google Scholar, whatever the research gate, right? Some are YouTube. Those are my interests. So always the traffic moving away from my network. So I rarely access the EMI server here, leave examination management information system, examination information management system, EIMS, and leave system. There are a couple of systems inside the uni. So I'm accessing only, very rarely accessing them. So most of the traffic that I generate moving away from the network. So it contributed in the 80% of the outflows while 20% is inside the network. That is the nature at the present era. Called 80%, 80 to 20 rule, which is stated as 20% of the traffic went over the backbone, is obsolete. Internet web browser now enable user to locate and access information anywhere on the corporate intranet. So anywhere on the corporate intranet කියන්නේ ඕන තැනක ඉඳන් corporate intranet එක access කරන්න පුළුවන්. ඕන තැනක ඉඳන් corporate intranet එක access කරන්න internet හින්දානේ. Without internet it is not possible. So with that it is the inter-network communication is introduced. Network දෙකක් අතර මොකද user එළියට ගිහිල්ලා එළියේ නම් mobile එකෙන් connect වෙද්දි එයා ඉන්නේ අපේ network එකේ නෙමෙයි අපේ IP අරගෙන නෙමෙයි. නමුත් that facility is there someone to access remotely and get the resources with mutual understanding. ඔක්කොම නටපු දෙන්නේ නැහැනේ එහෙම access. Okay. Traffic patterns are dictated by where the servers are located and not by the physical work group configuration with which they happen to be grouped. Anyway, 172. We discussed this part. I can find out exactly this one also covered. Bottleneck symptoms. Yeah. Preventing broadcast storms. I think we will stop by this point. We are stopping today a little early.